7th, 2023. Meeting of the Citizen Review Board is now called to order. If you will, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I will now ask our meeting clerk, Ms. Tanya Wilcox, if you will, please conduct the roll call.
Banks, Collins, Tamayo,
Present.
Reyes,
Present.
Guy, Akil,
Present.
Ingendella,
Present.
Valdez.
Present. Let the record show that all members of the Citizen Review Board are present, with the exception of Reverend Banks and Dr. Collins. Typically at this time, we will continue with our agenda, but I recognize our chief of the City of Tampa Police Department is present. I would like to allow the chief to approach the podium and address the board, if you will. If you will, welcome, Chief. Nice seeing you again. Please continue.
First, I want to thank this board here for your steadfast commitment to the mission. And this board's an important board to me, and I do greatly, sincerely appreciate your service. I realize that you guys are doing this on your own time, and it doesn't go unnoticed. And while all your roles are critical, one that I really want to highlight and appreciate is your commitment to assisting us in developing and hiring the next generation of police officers. That interview process that we do is crucial in our candidates, and your involvement does mean the world to us, so we do appreciate that. Like I've said before, I'm truly honored to lead this department. I'm honored to be in this position. I'm honored to have the support from council, from the community, from the police officers. It's a very humbling experience to me. If you were to ask me what's the difference between the job I was doing before and the job now, it's the public attention. And that gets them getting used to, which eventually I get more comfortable with, but I'm not that type of person that's always been out in front of the curtain, so to speak. I've been the one behind the curtains getting the job done. But the job itself has not changed. The relationships are very important to me, the relationships with you all, with council, with our community. But it doesn't just stop there. It's also with the other stakeholders, whether it's the state attorney, other law enforcement agencies, having that relationship. I actually just had a meeting earlier today with the marshal for the Court of Appeals in establishing, because they're over at the Stetson Law School now on a temporary basis. So establishing that relationship with the airport, with Temple Terrace, having that relationship across the board. We actually, on that note, we had some applicants, and you may have interviewed some of them. We had 3 from the Winter Haven Police Department that came to my desk to hire. And the first thing that I saw when I read that is like, how many officers do they have? And if we were to hire all 3, what impact would that be on that organization? So I called that police chief up and asked him about that. And obviously, that's not a big department, and losing 3 would be a big impact. So he was greatly appreciative of the call, and we ended up just hiring 1 out of that review. So I think that's important, not only the relationship with the community, you all, council, but our other criminal justice partners, because when something happens, we're all coming together to work with that. So I just want to give you kind of a highlight of some of our efforts that I've told council. Our efforts so far, year to date, have seen a significant reduction in violent crime and violent crime with a firearm. We're nearing double digits. This month that we're in now has actually been a little bit of an uptick. But so far, year to date, we've recovered over 950 firearms. We're actually, as I'm speaking today, we're putting out a press release. I don't know if you saw in the news about the shooting that occurred in West River with the young teenagers that was there. So we did an arrest 48 hours after for a 15-year-old that was shooting inside that game room. And then just the other day, we arrested an 18-year-old that was in there with a rifle. And then after that, we actually had some leads, and we just did a search warrant on a house and recovered 10 guns and made 3 additional arrests. So our officers are doing a great job following up on these cases. They have a sense of urgency like you would not believe. We had other law enforcement agencies from across the nation come and see us in January, and that was the big takeaway, is how impressed they were with our relationships and our sense of urgency. So that's obviously a good commitment for that. And we've talked about this before. despite the crime that we're having, our data from the Major City Chiefs Association shows that Tampa is ranked among the lowest in violent crime and overall crime for cities our size. I actually just met with a retired chief from the police department, Stephen Hogue. I don't know if any of you guys ever met him or heard of him, but when he came here, Tampa was the second highest crime for a city its size. And now we are, over 20 years later, the second lowest. So, I mean, that's just a true testimony to the efforts of our officers and our community engagement. So you may have also heard the mayor says this everywhere she goes, is Time Magazine rated Tampa as one of the greatest cities in the world. And it's not just here in Tampa you see that, but if you travel to other cities, you literally do notice that and see it right away. I had the opportunity of going to Louisville for the Major City Chiefs Association. Well, they have a great downtown, they have a great city. When you go there, it does not compare to Tampa. It's night and day. So everyone wants to come to Tampa. Everyone wants to be here. And just being in a police department that's one of the greatest in the nation and one of the city, it's a humbling experience to be in this role. So as chief, I look to expanding our recruiting efforts. And one thing that you may have already seen is we're doing a massive social media explosion on hiring. We're trying to get more recruits to apply from within the city. We get a plethora of recruits that apply from outside the city and outside the state, but we're really gearing to try to get some more homegrown officers. We're taking ads out, we're boosting social media, we're using a network. I'm starting to see more. I'd like to see more applicants come that way, but that's the ideal goal, is to get more homegrown. So what are we doing besides spending money on advertising? We're doing scholarship academies where we will pay your way to go to the academy and we'll pay you a salary while you're in the academy. So that makes it easier for somebody that actually has a family that's dependent on them working, to where they can stop that, go to the academy and still support their family. And if they successfully complete the academy and pass the state test, then we will hire them as a police officer. So I think that will definitely help. In addition to that, I look to keep our priorities very similar to what they were before. Quality assurance and accountability is very important to me. I was actually in Captain Messmer's role when we started the Professional Standards Bureau in our quality assurance unit. I was spearheaded that, so that's a commitment to mine, and having that is very important. Reducing crime is important, but also the fear of crime. You can have one of the lowest crime stats, but you can still have people that are afraid of crime. So the perception of crime is just as important to me as the crime stats. So measuring that and how we do that is something that we're exploring. Mike Schmidt will probably talk to you later about some surveys that we're looking to do to measure the fear of crime in addition to our crime stats. So the other thing that you may have heard is expanding our community-oriented policing philosophy. So COVID, obviously, we're all in that role. We're separated. You think about this, back in 2020, what are officers told to do? Stay 6 feet away, wear a mask. And then naturally, the community policing starts to divide itself up. So putting that emphasis back on. So when I became interim back in December, that was the first goal of mine, is not just having select community policing officers, but have every officer involved in community policing. It's a philosophy, it's not just an initiative. So some of the ways that we're doing to encourage that is by providing videos of some of the things that officers are doing and sharing it with the other officers. So I'll give you an example recently. We do juvenile checks on juveniles that are on sanctions, for example, a curfew. A juvenile was on a curfew, I believe it was a 9 p.m. curfew, and the officer, instead of just going by to see if they're there at 9 or 9:15, and check the box, what does the officer do? The officer gets a rapport with the juvenile, a rapport with the family, links up the kid with a program that we're doing over the summer called Shielding Our Teens. I don't know if you've heard of that, but basically it teaches teens how to actually interview and dress for a job interview. And then they did that with this juvenile, and then he got a job at Chick-fil-A and is now actually on the right path. So it was that officer going above and beyond that turned this kid's life around, as opposed to just going by and seeing if they're there at 9 o'clock and checking the box. That's just one example. Another example would be if your house was burglarized. You are already feeling violated that your house is burglarized, and the officer that comes out, This is a true story. An officer came out to an elderly citizen's house, and her house was burglarized. He noted when he was out there that the front porch light was out. Took it upon himself to go get the replacement light bulb, replace it for the lady, and then exchange the card and the phone number. So at the end of this house being burglarized, she now knew the officer that patrolled her area by name and who went and replaced her light for her. So that's community policing. It's not necessarily always having coffee with a cop that people already support us, but it's those daily encounters and making that difference and having that knowing of who that officer is in your area. So that's our goal, that's our initiative. In addition to that, wellness for our officers, wellness for our community. It's a big initiative. I have several grants in store that I'm hoping by October I'll get some positive feedback on some initiatives that we'd like to take. So as we continue this positive momentum, we'll expand this community policing even further in the department. I look to expanding our youth outreach programs even more, our PAL, Police Athletic League. We've already doubled the number of officers that are in there. We're expanding that as we speak. I look forward to other programs, Bigs and Blue, you name it. Whatever we can do to assist. I know our Rich House has seen a lot of support. We have other organizations looking at doing events there with that. So we can't do it alone, though. We're 1,000 officers, there's 400,000 residents in this city, and that's what we say is it's a team approach, and we need everybody to come together. In Tampa, we like to say that we're safer together, and if we can collectively work on the issues and problem solve, it's much better than just 1,000 of us trying to address the issue. So I look forward to working with this board to hear your concerns, working to common solutions for everyone. I look forward to the community outreach, the forums, the initiatives. I'll tell you right now we're breaking news. We're getting ready to highlight our Town Hall Tuesdays, where we're going to go to each sector in the town and do a town hall community forum similar to what we did after Memphis. And we got a lot of positive feedback from that. It was basically an hour long, and we spent about the first 30 minutes educating the community on what we do and our policies, and then the last 30 minutes was an open discussion. We got a lot of feedback, so we're going to try to do that in every neighborhood on Tuesday evenings. All right, well, that's kind of the highlights for me. Did anybody have any questions or anything for me?
You will. Colonel Reyes?
Thank you. Hey, Chief, congratulations again,
Thank you.
well-deserved on your appointment. Very interested in your comment with regards to hiring. And so here in Hillsborough County, of the 67 counties, we have the most veterans, military and of course veterans, just under 100,000 to be precise. What, if any, marketing strategies do you have in targeting, in a good way, our military community, and especially our transitioning military? That's a big deal, and I'm very involved with that, especially with the job fairs on the base, as well as hiring our heroes, which is part of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce effort, and then the Disabled American Veterans, DAV, that run national and yearly hiring events here.
So we have a military affairs liaison. I don't know if you've met Sergeant Sue Leiberts. That's her role,
Yes.
is to be our liaison and share that information. But obviously our outreach, we would like to expand that. So if there's anything that you can do also to share that in assistance to her, we would greatly appreciate that. We can forward you the email of the recruitment flyers and links to our social media if you'd be willing to share that as well.
Yes, and I know Sue, I haven't talked to her actually in a little while, but please mention this, that we have this conversation. I'd be more than helpful in any capacity to help as an interface as well with the base.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel Reyes. If you will, Tamayo?
Chief, thank you very much for coming in, and again, congratulations.
Thank you.
Well deserved. Just for the edification of Tampa citizens, how long have you been with TPD?
27 years. Feel like I was born and raised here, even though I wasn't. I was born on the other side of the bay. I've lived more of my life here than anywhere else.
Very good. And were you in law enforcement before joining TPD?
No, wasn't old enough.
Okay. And what inspired you to be a law enforcement officer?
It's a good question. And none of my family was in law enforcement. I married into a law enforcement family. But actually, it was an interaction that I had with my school resource officer at Clearwater High, who motivated me and inspired me to look into something. And then after that, I did my internship at USF with probation and parole, which was the path I was looking to go down. And then I did ride-alongs with the Tampa Police Department, and I knew right after that that this is what I wanted to do.
Very good, very good. And I knew Chief Hogue very well. He actually came to Academy Prep almost every Wednesday to do study hall with our kids. I know that I think TPD's become a little bit busier since the days of Chief Hogue, but the light's always on for you if you'd like to come by.
Perfect. I'm a math guy, so we can do math.
Very good. We need help. Thank you, Chief.
If you will, Carlos Valdez.
Chief, I wish I can say that you have big shoes to fill, but I want and I hope that when you depart to retirement, to whatever that looks like, that we can say to the next person coming in that they have big shoes to fill. This community needs you. This community is looking for what you said, accountability, transparency, and I'm hopeful that with your leadership and your guidance, we can bring that to light, and that the community can feel more at ease knowing that they have a leader such as yourself to be able to maneuver through certain things here and there. I do want to piggyback on two things you said. The hiring pool, I participated today the entire day in the hiring interview in the panel, and it's just magnificent to see that team, how they work so closely together. All the officers that are there, super professional. The candidates that come in, every time you hear them talk about, we want to be part of the city of Tampa. We love what's going on in Tampa. We're not just because of the pay, but because of what we hear in terms of different aspects in terms of growth. So I commend that squad for doing what they do day in, day out, and it's an honor to be part of that process as well. And the second thing I want to piggyback is on the curfew checks you mentioned. Part of the ride-alongs, I've been able to witness those curfew checks and witness the interaction between the police officers and the juveniles, and you can tell it's not just, you're home, okay, bye. It's a dialogue that happens. Let me know if you need anything. So those are the little things that goes a long way, so we appreciate that. But thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, it's, what we're trying to say is it's not just checking the box. It's quality over quantity, and it's the interaction and making the most of it. So, yeah, thank you.
If you will, Ms. Irene Guy.
Thanks for coming and seeing us tonight. You spent a lot of time with us, so you do know what we do, and that's a great thing, and we appreciate you being here so soon after you were appointed, and congratulations.
Thank you.
If you will, Dr. Collins.
Congratulations, welcome, and look forward to seeing you as frequent as you feel or deem it's appropriate. You said something about the Tuesday talks, and I thought that was great, going to all of the communities. Pre-pandemic, there were district chats with the districts. They were excellent to me. They were extremely well attended to the ones that I attended. And we were participating as the CRB, coming as your guest and trying to advertise and being there with you. If you continue or if you pursue that again as well and start doing those in District 1, 2, and 3, and they just, sporadically spread it out, but give them great notifications, I would like to say at least, notify the CRB. I would like to see us be aware of it, and those that want to attend can attend, because we're going into communities now based on a modification that was done with the city council, but the attendance is nothing. I mean, I could say it's zero compared to what we were doing with you, and I felt great because you had all the officers there, they were interacting with the community, the folks was there, they knew we were there, and they had an opportunity to ask questions and do that. So I'm real excited in hearing the Tuesday's talks and hoping that at some point the district forums that was held once a year in each one of the districts could be reassumed as well.
Absolutely, and as soon as we're done with the flyer, we'll make sure that Mike or Captain Messmer will make sure that you all get it and you can attend as much as you can. The more the merrier.
Actually, I do have a question.
If you will, Deputy Gandela.
one of the first things you mentioned was gun safety. And I know July, some of the gun laws are changing. Do you guys have a plan in place for how that's gonna change or what we might expect to see going forward starting July?
Yes, we have a detailed legal bulletin that provides the officer with the updates in the law, and we're actually, in addition to that, going to roll call training. So there's a lot involved in it. We'd be more than happy to have you even attend one of the roll calls to see the training.
That'd be great, thank you.
Dr. Collins?
On that, if there's any detail in that, is it any way at some point in the near future, since July the 1st is next week, I guess, or somewhere around the corner, that even if someone could come, if we didn't go to roll call training? The reason I ask, we did ask at some community meetings that I've been, and even the dispatchers was saying, we're all in training now, we'll get back and let everybody know. And even when we come, that's great, but when you come here, the community that's watching it get
Absolutely.
a chance to know. And it would be nice if we had that. Thanks for that question.
Well, I could have a subject matter expert come in. It could be one of the attorneys, just, it might even be this one right here.
That'd be great.
All right.
Thank you
Thank
for coming. Typically, we give out an invite with guests, but for you to, in your busy schedule and just receiving this new role, to come out immediately, that's greatly appreciated and applauded. In assisting the CRB with our role with bringing community and police together in support of community policing. A lot of the bullet points that you mentioned tonight obviously come from your years of experience in the city of Tampa, being able to work in all 3 districts and things of that nature. So you have the full support of the board, and is there anything that we can do to assist you with the accomplishments moving forward to ensure a safer community and also support the community? Is anything, please don't hesitate to ask. And let's continue to work together and move forward and continue to make this city great.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And then your
Thank you.
relationship is that's the important part right now, is everybody's on the same wavelength, so to speak, as we're all working together for the same mission of making Tampa safer together. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you again. Congratulations. Also, let the record show that Dr. Collins is present. Make sure it's noted in the minutes. And we will continue with our agenda under the approval of the minutes from the meeting of May 23rd, 2023. Do we have a second?
Second.
Board Member Irene Guy has made a motion to approve the minutes of May 23rd, 2023. Dr. Collins has seconded the motion. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll continue with the vote. All those in favor, please show by raise of hand. Any opposed? The motion passes. Thank you. We will now continue with item 4, public comment. If you will, Colonel Reyes, could you dictate the meeting guidelines?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Please silence all electronic devices. The duties and responsibilities of the Citizens Review Board are to review completed department investigations involving use of force and cases of importance and interest to the community or the city, determine whether the disposition of reviewed cases was consistent with department policies and procedures, review matters of importance or interest, and make recommendations regarding the handling of these matters, determine whether any revisions or additions to department policy and procedures are appropriate in reviewing matters of or interest or importance, and report findings and recommendations to the mayor and chief of police. Cases that are brought before the Citizens Review Board are closed internal affairs cases that have been investigated and brought to the police chief for disposition. It is the Citizens Review Board's job to review the cases and render an opinion as to whether the investigation was done according to department policies and procedures. The Citizens Review Board members are provided the investigative files in advance of the meeting. The Citizens Review Board will hear from the department whenever matters of interest or importance are requested for review by the board or the department. The coordinator for the board is Captain Patrick Mesmer, Any person who wishes to make a complaint concerning a matter which may be considered by the Professional Standards Bureau should see Captain Mesmer for information on how to file a complaint. And finally, the board should not discuss matters where the city or the department may likely be a party in litigation.
Thank you, Colonel. At this time, if you will, if there's any participants in reference to public comment, please go ahead and approach the podium. As you approach the podium, please state your name and address for the record, and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Philip Freund, and my address is on the sign-in sheet. I'm with the Tampa Bay Community Action Committee, and I'm here asking with regards to the ordinance that was passed a few months ago regarding the independent council. I was wondering what is the update regarding the independent council for the Citizens Review Board? And a second point is with the case of Kelsey Staremski. Last meeting it was mentioned that the reason her case has been pushed to October is to so she would not be able to sue the city. And I was wondering if I could get an elaboration on that as well. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other participants for the public comment portion of this agenda? I will now ask if we received any written public comment for this particular meeting. No written public comment. Anything received through our voicemail of 813-274-7340?
Chair Mike Schmidt.
You will.
We checked the voicemail, and we advise people to check, leave a message 24 hours before 24 hours for the meeting. We checked it though today, this afternoon. There was nothing on the recorded voicemail. I then subsequently around 5 o'clock got a call from the clerk that someone had called her and advised her that they had left a voicemail. Unfortunately, due to the fact that it was after 5 p.m., I was unable to pull that voicemail for tonight's meeting, which is why we tell people to leave it in advance. So we will pull it and download it. We got to download it and bring it over here, and we just couldn't get that done by after 5. So we'll present that at next meeting, but I did want you to know there was one recorded call. It just came in too late to bring it to you tonight.
The recorded audio, does it fit in the same parameters of the 3-minute honoring, or does that voicemail surpass 3 minutes? How's
I do believe we say on our notice to keep it to 3 minutes or less. Correct.
Thank you. But now continue with the agenda. That concludes the public comment portion of this agenda. If you will, we'll continue with item 6, staff and board response to public comment. There was a gentleman here who raised a question. If anyone that can answer that question or would like to respond to that particular public comment, and maybe Mike, maybe you can assist us with the question in reference to the notion of
Independent counsel?
the independent counsel, and also the matter in reference to the public meeting of October 24th of Casey Stormiski, in reference to a possible lawsuit. If you can elaborate on that, it'd be greatly appreciated.
Sure, absolutely. As far as the independent counsel update, it has been posted. The job had to be drafted, the language for the advertisement. It's been posted in a couple of locations. I think there's some more postings to do, but so far it's in the process of being advertised. So as soon as the advertising window ends and we have the candidates, we'll keep you updated every month. But right now it is currently in the process of being advertised.
question.
If you will, Mr. Valdez.
What would the process look like? So you guys identify candidates, will you guys be interviewing them, or will we be interviewing them, identifying, like, how does that process look like? Or should we, is it too complex and we should put it in a presentation format?
I don't know if it's too complex, but I will tell you that I wasn't hands-on in that process. It was,
Fair enough.
so I don't want to accidentally say something that's inaccurate tonight, because I didn't really come prepared to look into that. And while I have a general idea, of course, of it all, and I know the city attorney is the one who's actively advertising and making sure she reviews the candidates, I can't recall now how the ordinance actually got finalized when it did get drafted, so I don't want to speculate. But I know the city attorney's involved, if I recall, you guys are involved, and then I believe even city council's involved. The level of involvement, I don't want to say tonight, because I just don't have it in front of me. I apologize for
So I would
that.
like to make a motion to have a presentation to this board on what that process is gonna look like, so that we understand
Yeah.
what to expect moving forward.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
It's a motion on the floor for a presentation for a member of administration, city staff, to present the forecast or the process in reference to the independent council. That motion has been seconded by Mr. Tamayo. Any further discussion? If you will, Ms. Guy?
Yeah, I think just getting a copy of the ordinance is really what we need. I'm not sure a presentation is what we need. None of us have seen the ordinance as far as I know, right? I mean, it's,
Right, I'm
I
happy.
think we need
I can see that.
to be sent a copy of the ordinance. That should probably answer the question, I would
Yeah.
think.
For ease of you guys, we'll be happy to send you the ordinance, and Kamaria will be here next month, and if we'll be able to answer any questions.
I would like to maintain the motion with a presentation.
So there's a motion on the floor. Any further discussion in reference to the motion, in reference to the presentation of independent counsel? Hearing none, we'll continue with the vote. All those in favor of the presentation of independent counsel being presented to the Citizen Review Board, please show by raise of hand. Any opposed? That motion passes. Thank you. And again, there's flexibility in that date as things progress to ensure that that presentation is in its full complex of understanding. So if there's still loose ends to be tied up, then we can
Absolutely.
pass off the presentation until it's ready to be presented. So just keep us posted.
Yes, sir.
If you would, Mr. Tamayo.
Are we compelled, and I'm saying we generally, compelled to hire an independent counsel?
There was, as you know, there was an ordinance, and then it did pass through
Yeah, I know, but-
the voters, so I would say at this point, probably, yes.
You will, Dr. Collins.
Yeah, and my question was, in presenting the process, even if we get the ordinance at that time, or that's part of the presentation, so we'll understand the process. And for that reason, I wouldn't want us to wait too long, because it'll be after whatever it is. So I think if Ms. Pettimacker could make a presentation, or whoever at next meeting, because she had said that she would let us know when whatever was happening. And I am getting calls asking me, and I told them exactly what we've already done, that I would make sure that I ask. So people who are listening, they will know as much as we know. And I think that would be helpful if we kind of got the ordinance as well as the presentation, so at least we will know. And if at any point we're gonna be included in the process.
You will be, the ordinance will be sent to you soon. I'll get that to you guys, that's not a problem at all. And as far as your involvement, I just don't want to speak to the level of involvement, because I don't remember what the ordinance says. But you do have some involvement in the process.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll now continue with the agenda and item 7, items to be reviewed. Tonight, we're reviewing case number 22F-008 of a MOR 1007, conformance to laws, sustained. MOR 1005, standard of conduct, sustained. An officer was charged with soliciting another to commit prostitution, and the officer resigned without penalty. If we will, Captain Messmer.
Again, Captain Patrick Messmer, Professional Standards Bureau. So this specific case involved a former officer, Officer Stanley Clearvo, on Wednesday, July 19th of 2022. Officer Clearvo began to communicate with who he thought was a escort on a website that is mainly designed to procure escorts. He started communicating with that person via text message the next morning on July 20th on a Thursday. Officer Clearvo responded to a hotel with the intent to have sex with that individual in exchange for money. That individual turned out to be a undercover Hillsborough County Sheriff's detective. They were performing a human trafficking operation. At that point, Officer Clearvo was arrested and charged with solicitation of prostitution. He was taken to jail. During the administrative investigation, he gave an interview to Internal Affairs. He admitted that he felt that he was guilty of the crime of soliciting another to commit prostitution. He admitted that he has used that site in the past and done the same thing without getting caught. And he was facing termination, that he elected to resign in lieu of termination. This case was reported to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement as the charges were sustained. They did find probable cause that there was a moral character violation on the part of Officer Clearvo. That is still in its administrative process with FDLE. There has not been a conclusion to that yet. I know he is not employed in the criminal justice field anymore, to my knowledge. I know he is not with any other law enforcement agency. That's pretty much the short of it. It was a pretty open and shut case.
So this officer was arrested and has went through the judicial system, and at this point, there's a criminal case attached where there may still be penalty on the criminal case side.
My understanding is that the criminal case was filed by the state attorney's office. It has since been resolved.
Do we know how it's been resolved?
To my knowledge, at some point, he was entering a misdemeanor intervention program, which is a program that's available to really anybody who has certain first-time misdemeanor offenses. But as of now, I don't know how that specifically resolved itself.
So Captain Messmer, thank you, Mr. Chair. So he was put in a diversion program because of this? Instead of being charged, they offered him a diversion program?
To my knowledge, he went into the misdemeanor intervention program, correct?
Okay, thank you.
Well, Dr. Collins?
Just a couple of questions about the officer. How long has the officer been with TPD? I thought I saw it, but I don't.
It was a little under 2 years.
I really wanted to ask kind of like a different question. I don't think it's been that long since we've been assisting with the hiring process, but I'm just trying to hope that this was an officer that came through that process. So, how long we been involved with that? Less than a year, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I was just curious.
We definitely did not.
Chair, the truth
You will.
is,
Guy?
officers are hired every day, and they are people, and people do these things. So if we were involved or not involved, I'm sure the process was exactly what we are doing, and he cleared all those hurdles. But he's a person, he's a human, and he did something wrong, he got arrested, and he was fired from the police department. I think that really is the bottom line. I'm not really sure why we're looking at this case. because other than the fact that it's salacious, you know, I'm not really sure what, you know, this is pretty cut and dry to me. I mean, the guy was arrested and he resigned. We didn't fire him. But I think that's the right thing to do because it costs a lot of money to fire people. So it's better if they resign before you fire them. So I mean, my comment is I'm not really sure what we're digging into here.
Yeah, and I can address that and the other, I know that was something that came up last month that's on the agenda for a little bit later about the whole termination versus resignation thing. But as far as Dr. Collins' comment about the involvement of the CRB in the hiring process, the interview process, again, whether or not the board was or was not, the interview process, the hiring process, we're talking about lengthy background investigations. There was nothing similar in this officer's background that would have indicated that he would be subject to behavior like this. We give them polygraph exams, again, passed a polygraph exam with no issues. So there was nothing in the officer's background that, you know, there would have been red flags that he would engaged in prostitution.
And I'm sorry.
If you would, continue, Dr. Collins.
And basically, I thought we had not been involved for a year, but you kind of hit one of the questions on a little bit of just, I almost felt like you felt. I was saying, hey, everything went right, he was fired, so be it. But the only thing I thought is, okay, it's a fresh case. You know, we had been getting cases that weren't, 2 or 3 years out. But the one thing that I thought about is what you just said, because if he did say, I've been doing this, but I had never gotten caught before, you wouldn't have been able to find that out anyway, because he had never gotten caught. But faith would have it that this officer got caught, and that was the practice that he had. And now we don't have to worry about it anymore.
You will, Mr. Valdez.
I'm just curious again to learn more about the presentation that you'll be presenting to us. While I don't agree that resignation is better than termination in a case like this, accountability is key. And what I'm hoping that I'm not hearing is that we're giving officers an opportunity to resign or a window to resign in lieu of terminating them. So I'm hoping that can get clarified to me, because again, I keep seeing cases come to this board in front of us of issues that are legitimate reasons to have termination, and then they're resigning. And again, people change and they go back into records and they say, oh, he wasn't terminated, he was resigned, yeah, let's hire him. Or they call for a recommendation, oh yeah, this officer was resigned, he didn't get terminated or held accountable for anything, he's a great candidate and will be doing great things with you all. Even though, yes, there may be, or there will be a track record as it pertains to their file, but I just want to make sure that the message is clear and authentic.
I can either address that now, or we can wait until, it's whatever the board wants. This specific case, he was allowed to resign. We can't necessarily prevent somebody from quitting their job. No, you have to stay here another couple weeks. And as I get into this PowerPoint here, we'll go into the actual process that it goes with terminating somebody. And there are a lot of checklists and a lot of procedural things that have to do that take weeks, even after the person's noticed that they're being terminated. They have a lot of opportunity to resign in that time. And one of the other things that happens, this officer, if you want to read his interview, he gave justifications. He was going through a breakup with his girlfriend, and he made a lot of things up. In this case, he went through a diversionary program. I believe he successfully completed the diversionary program. If we had terminated him and he grieved that termination, went in front of the Civil Service Board and gave them a sob story and said, well, look, my diversion was successful. I'm not convicted of a crime. I was going through hard times. I think I need my job back. The Civil Service Board could have given him his job back. So the fact that they resign, that process of grievances and appeals is gone, because once you resign, you can't go and appeal your resignation. So a lot of times it's much easier for the department. It kind of prevents any kind of surprise in the future, as we've discussed cases before where officers have been terminated, then the board or an arbitrator has given them their jobs back. There were 2 cases that went in front of this board within the past, I guess, 2 years. One of them involved an officer who was using racial slurs who was fired, and the board gave him his job back, and another one involved an officer who ended up doing an inappropriate action on a traffic stop, and that officer was previously fired from another incident, but an arbitrator gave him his job back, and then he got his job back, and then he goes and does something else. So by allowing him to resign and not trying to challenge that, in addition to the legal issues that could come up if we try to challenge a resignation, it just cuts the chance of any sort of grievance out. So we can't run the risk of having an officer get their job back if we don't feel they should be employed. But that's just the example here, and that specific case that's in front of us, I think that's what his argument would have been, had he decided to grieve his termination. And, potentially would he have been able to be successful? Who knows? But, do you really want to go in front of in essence, a jury? The Civil Service Board is a jury of people who, just like you, can vote of whether or not they want to give this person their job back and give them a second chance, or say no. And it's just, it's a crapshoot at points.
Thank you.
Captain?
Well, Mr. Tamayo?
The interview with Internal Affairs was on August 10th, and then there was a finding to sustain the violations on August 12th. Do you know how soon after that the officer resigned?
I don't have I know if you look at the disposition letter, so the disposition letter was written on, August 12th, and then you have all the little dates above it. It looks like the chief signed off on it on September the 8th. So it took that time for all the other people in the chain of command to review it, and then get with the legal department and get with human resources. And then when the chief signed off on that on 9/8 of 22, that is when, he would have been noticed about his pending termination somewhere around that time.
Okay.
So I don't know. I can see if I can pull it up here if there's any other paperwork that's on here, but I don't believe I have anything that would have that date on there. Nope.
Okay, and did Officer Clearbo have any experience with law enforcement before his 21-month stint with TPD?
No, we did not.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions or statements for Captain Messmer? The chair is now open to a motion on whether we concur or not concur or are unable to reach determination regarding the disposition of this case, 22F-008, and its findings.
So moved to concur.
Second.
Board Member Irene Guy has made a motion to concur with the deposition and its findings. Board Member Lincoln Tamayo has seconded the motion. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we will continue with the vote. All those in favor, please show by raise of hand. Any opposed? That motion passes. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Continue with the agenda under CRB staff reports and business. Tonight we have 3 presentations of 3 different bullet points, starting with bullet point 1 regarding the CRB community survey.
Hello, Mike Schmidt again. With regards to the community survey, first let me explain what the requirements are under the ordinance. Under 18-8, the CRB shall conduct a community survey to obtain public feedback about Tampa Police Department and its policies and procedures. The survey shall occur every 2 years. When this ordinance came in place was at the end of December of 2021, so in our opinion, we would need to begin in December of 2023, by December of 2023, to have begun conducting the survey. The survey is to be posted for 10 weeks and be open for a 10-week period. So with these parameters, TPD has started to look into its own survey, because that's an important thing for TPD to conduct surveys as well. So we started to explore the options of what TPD is interested in as far as surveys. We've looked at numerous options, and we thought that we would invite the board to also participate in the survey. Tonight, I was hopeful to come forward and say, this is what we've decided we're going to do as far as, which avenue TPD was gonna go, and then allow the board to discuss how it wanted to participate with questions and things like that, and how the board could add on to the survey. But unfortunately, we haven't made our decision yet, because conducting a survey is, it's a lot of factors. So we've been exploring several options, including USF, including something called Zen City, including, something as simple as SurveyMonkey, to also local survey companies that conduct surveys. So we have done a pretty broad range scope of all the different options we feel are out there. And we are considering the various factors to try to get a fair, impartial survey that would represent the cross-section of the community. And so in order to ensure that we develop the best survey for the department, we haven't made our ultimate decision yet. So at this point tonight, I can't tell you what we're going to do ultimately for the survey, but I think we have time. So I propose next month we keep this agenda item on there. Next month, I would like to come back and say, this is the option that we think TPD is going to go forward with in conducting a survey, and also invite you to participate with that survey and participate this board in coming up with questions that you would like to see on the survey, and we can work together on making sure we get a survey out for 10 weeks that this board participates in. So.
The chair is open to a motion in reference to tabling the presentation after its findings regarding the CRB or collaboration TPD community survey.
I have a question before the motion.
Before the chair is open to a motion, there's no motion on the table, if you will, Dr. Collins.
Yeah, I was gonna ask a question before the
Yes.
motion. It's okay?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The previous survey that we did do, that was, I thought, pretty good and gave us some leverage after we had to put it back out there again. Is it any way we still have I know I have a copy of it, but do we still have the questions from that survey while we're waiting over the next month's meeting?
Sure.
That could be sent back to us. And the other one that I wanted to ask about, I'm pleased with the one that we did, but I understand that the committee that came before us and did a presentation, they did a survey. It wasn't as successful. It was affiliated with the University of South Florida. They weren't as successful with their survey, but they had one, and I never did see theirs. I don't know if we have questions. And I know they work with the mayor, and I can't remember, but just out of curiosity, if that's available, if that survey could be sent to us, so at least we can look at both of those. And some board members may have not seen the first one.
So if that was a question for me, I'll address it, what I can on that. So as far as the prior survey, absolutely, we'll send that back out to you, and I think the questions are in there as well as the results. And as you're aware, that was conducted by NYU, and, there was, that took a while, obviously, for both the board and for NYU, and was quite an extensive project. Those which is what led us to reaching out to you, and that combined with the presentation, I would say, maybe it was a year ago, I can't recall. It's been a while, but there was somebody who, professor, I believe she may have been a doctor, may have been Brianna Fox, if I recall, who came before this board and talked about her work with the city in trying to get some questions out for the city. And that survey has certainly been done. But she also mentioned at the end of her presentation, working on a future possible survey for this board. So I did try to reach out to USF for that reason. And they are certainly willing to participate. The problem is there's, of course, the labor-intensive study of that magnitude requires a lot of grad students, and then it requires a professor to oversee it. I can tell you that, that is still something we're looking at, but right now, that is probably the most expensive option. And I think, it's just, we're exploring all options, and maybe, because sometimes when you have to send humans out to the field, you're asking a lot of grad students and a professor, and so I don't know that that's gonna be ultimately the best option. USF's not willing to do it for free. That's the answer. I called them and they said, yeah, sure, we're willing to help, but it ain't free. So I said, interesting. Knowing that option is there is great, but knowing that it is probably the most labor-intensive option, that may not be the best option for this board or the police department.
And to make sure you be explicitly clear with whatever you guys decide, I was not impressed with their survey compared to the one that we had already done. So I wouldn't say go there. I never saw their questions, their survey. I heard about it because she came and presented it to us. If we got it and you guys saw it, I didn't see it. So I was just saying if they have a copy of it, or if we have a copy on file that we could look at it, but I just wanted to see what their questions look like compared to the ones we had.
Yeah, and there was a different scope, I mean, I think what she was developing was more for the city versus for the police department. So I mean, that's another reason your questions wouldn't have, been the same. NYU's survey was specifically developed for, the police department and this board.
But it was only not to say use it for the expense of or anything. It was just simply to be able to just see whatever it was, because we never did see it. We only heard
Okay.
about, and I know the numbers that they reached was far smaller than what we reached.
But they reached the same conclusions we did, even though they did another survey.
Because I don't even remember the
Yeah.
conclusions. It was that little.
Yeah, the results was pretty similar. If you will, Carlos Valdez.
This will be my first rodeo with the survey process, so this will be all new to me, but I do appreciate the fact TPD taking into consideration wanting to join forces with us. I want to make sure that this board has a voice with that survey and that we approve every single question with the language that we would like to see on that survey, and not for those questions to get sugar-coated some type of way. So again, I want to make sure that part of this process, this board is available and we approve the survey as we choose to see it go out. And definitely, count on this board, myself, in terms of being able to get the word out and be able to have as many people, individuals, partake in the survey in multiple formats, whether it's text messages, scanning the code, email, whatever that looks like, attending events. I think would be key to be able to get it to the multiple facets of the community, knowing that there's a lot of different communities that don't have multiple resources to access surveys or whatnot. So coming up with creative ways to be able to have the survey sent out to all forms, source of status in the community.
And I'll just address a little of that just by saying that our primary goal is obviously making sure we do get a fair and accurate survey. So while we look at these options, we want to make sure that the survey isn't somehow skewed one way or another, right? So we're trying to figure out what is the most accurate and fair way to get a survey without, potentially jeopardizing, one section of the community over-representing the survey.
Sure.
So we understand that, but at the same, but there's not, it's more difficult than you would think, right? Like there's always going to be, well, if you do this, then there's this. If you do this, there's this. There's different arguments for every single thing that we've already looked at and considered, whether it was USF, whether it was an online survey, whether it was, in-person type survey. There's somebody who's going to argue that there's another way to do it. And the bottom line is we will look at all of them, and TPD is going to do a survey for, and put questions in that we also need to make sure that we can measure against something. So if you say we just draft our own 20 questions, but they're not standardized with other cities, or maybe what other questions have been asked in the past, what do you have to compare that on? You don't. So that's complicated. We want to make sure our questions have some basis of background. So if we find questions that other cities have asked that will help us with a comparison for what our city's response rate is, that could help out. So there's a benefit to thinking about using questions that have been tested and tried. But I'm not saying, but we want your input too.
Sure.
So at the same point, I hope that we're able to achieve a balance. Like, we want to find some questions that we believe that we can use for the department, so we have some comparison. Then if there are additional questions that this board wants, we're willing to try to put those on to the survey as well, right? As long as we're not creating now a 2-hour survey. Right? So we've got to rein this in. But we are certainly willing to work with the board, allow you guys to come up with some questions, but at the same point, as you were saying, like, we want to scrutinize every single question. I mean, at some point, the department needs to make sure it has questions that we believe are based on tried and tested questions that we can compare the data to and get some meaning out of. So I just add that so you're not surprised next month when we come forward and we say, well, these are some of the questions we want to bring forward. Do you have any additional questions you would like to ask? If that makes sense.
It does, and I would appreciate we can get extra time. Let's say you guys come back next month with the questions or whatever that looks like. Give us until the next meeting for us to look at the questions, and if we have anything to add, we can then bring back at that meeting, or do via email response, say, hey, give us a deadline of X within a week or two to submit our questions, so we don't delay the process, so that way we can take that into an account. And the second question I had.
That makes sense. And I think what we're trying to say is we have till December, so we have some time.
Exactly, but we have, time is of the essence, so we need to make sure we get, the ball rolling on this. Is the survey available in Spanish and Creole?
It depends who you use, but one of the options that we're looking at, it would be available in Spanish.
Okay.
If you will, Ms. Irene Guy.
I think the idea of sending the NYU survey to everyone is a great one, because there are lots of members of this board that weren't involved at that point, and that would give them an opportunity to see exactly what we did then and how it worked, because we didn't write all the questions. We had input into those questions, and the NYU people were very, professional. They knew how to do this so that they would get results that could be used. So I think that would be like step one, is to make sure everyone who's new on this board that wasn't here when we did the NYU survey gets to see that and see how it worked.
So, if you will, the chair is still open to the tabling bullet 1 under CRB staff reports and business to allow city administration to return with more information moving forward. And then in that process and in that return, can also get that past survey that was conducted. And keep in mind, those that sat on that board during that time frame, it wasn't an overnight process. It was pretty lengthy in putting that survey together and getting the results and following up with getting it out to the community. So it is a long process. There's a lot involved, but we are starting to move that ball forward now. This is beginning steps, and that's how that survey began as well. So it looks like Mike Schmidt has shared with us the information he has to this particular point. Obviously, there's a lot more to share. So this item may continue to be presented on the on the upcoming agendas as well. As I mentioned earlier, it's not an overnight process. So again, the chair is open to the motion if the board so move in reference to continuing this item on next month's agenda.
I make a motion that we continue the item on next month's agenda to get the pending information from the city and the copy of the survey that we did the last time and any additional information that might be able to help the board. And we get that information before the next month's meeting.
Second. There's a motion on the table. Dr. Collins has stated the motion in reference to tabling bullet 1 under CRB staff reports and business, as well as presenting the past survey to all board members. Mr. Carlo Valdez has seconded that motion. Any further discussion needed? Hearing none, we'll continue with the vote. All those in favor, please show by raising hand. Any opposed? So that motion passes. We'll see that on next month's agenda. And again, if we aren't able to come to a conclusion within that month, we'll continue the process. Let's go ahead and continue with bullet point 2 under CRB staff reports and business regarding complaint intake and administrative investigation process.
Right, again, Pat Messmer, Professional Standards Bureau. So I sent the board 2 of our standard operating procedures in regards to this, so I'm not going to go through this very detailed. I'm going to give a pretty high-level overview of the complaint intake and, excuse me, hang on. I put the wrong, I actually put the wrong one on there. Yep. That was this one, wrong one. So I already sent these 2 policies out, so I'm just going to give a high-level overview of the complaint intake process and the administrative investigation process. I know there were some questions that have come up in previous board meetings about how investigations are conducted. You've asked for certain cases to be brought in front of you, and like, well, that's not an actual case, that was just a complaint. So I'm going to kind of go into the details about like what is what. So the first thing that happens when a complaint comes in, complaints are accepted by any employee. We're going to accept those any means necessary, in person, by phone, via email, via internet, however the complaint comes in. Our supervisors will have a system, it's called Administrative Investigations Management. So every time a complaint comes in, the supervisor who gets the complaint is going to log that complaint. And they're going to log that complaint in the system. It's going to track to an officer, to a complainant if they give their name, if they're not anonymous. And then the supervisor is going to do an initial analysis of the complaint. They're going to make a determination based on reasonable suspicion, which basically is, are there articulable facts that would indicate a policy violation has occurred? So if there is a reasonable suspicion that a policy violation occurred, that complaint is going to be reclassified to an administrative investigation. And I'll discuss what those are in a minute. If there's not really enough information to see whether or not there's reasonable suspicion, then that complaint is going to get referred for further inquiry either to another supervisor, to a division commander, to a shift commander, somebody who could do some additional research and maybe talk to the officer and do fact-finding to determine whether or not there is a violation of policy. Or if it's clear that there is no violation of policy, or if there is not reasonable suspicion that there's a policy violation, the complaint's just going to be closed. So an example for that would be somebody calls in, says an officer was rude to them and discourteous on a traffic stop. The sergeant gets that complaint, they document it, they watch the body camera video, they make the determination that the officer was not rude to the complainant, and that complaint is then closed without any further action. Now the complaint is referred to that sergeant's supervisor, so it'll go to a lieutenant and a captain. So the sergeant's the one who does the inquiry and makes the decision, but it also gets reviewed by higher levels of management to make sure that they concur with that decision that that first line supervisor made when they close the complaint out. So all of them are reviewed in some way, shape, or form. So if there is reasonable suspicion that a policy violation occurred, then it becomes an administrative investigation. That's the type of things that you review here. And you review the ones that are on the top. Those are formal investigations. Now those are either serious misconduct, which is outlined in the policy. There's all sorts of different things that constitute serious misconduct. Basically, any kind of a moral character violation, any kind of criminal activity would be considered serious misconduct. And certain required by policy investigations anytime an officer discharges a firearm, anytime that there's life-threatening injury or death to a person as a result of police activity. Those things, those required investigations in serious misconduct, the chief of police directs those to be formal investigations that are conducted by internal affairs. So those are the things that you basically review on this board are the internal affairs investigations, serious misconduct, and the required by policy investigations when you review police shootings. The other investigation that comes out of complaints are the last one, they're service-related inquiries. So those are complaints that come in where either the initial review by internal affairs or the initial review by a supervisor determines that there is reasonable suspicion of a policy violation. Those are service-related inquiries. If they come through internal, they're all generated by me, so I review the complaint and I will send those complaints to the officers, division commander, captain, lieutenant, and sergeant for investigation. Now, those would be anything that doesn't involve serious misconduct. So an officer doesn't write a report, there is legitimate rudeness, discourtesy, body-worn camera violations from time to time. Those types of policy violations that don't meet the definition of serious misconduct that come from complaints, those get sent to the divisions to handle by that officer's chain of command. So you'll see the same, and I'll get into the disposition process in a minute, but it's the same letters are written that you see, like for this case. This time, it's written by the officer supervisor and goes through that chain of command rather than being written by a captain going through the chief of police. And then the third type of administrative investigation, which you normally don't deal with much at all, are what we call division investigations. Those are the things that are internal. Many of them, the vast majority of them are traffic crashes. Just like internal affairs has to investigate any complaint or any case of a firearm being discharged, anytime an officer is involved in a traffic crash, there is a administrative investigation into the traffic crash, in addition from the actual traffic crash investigation. So every traffic crash is a division investigation. If an officer is late for court, if an officer doesn't show up for an off-duty job, those types of things are also internally generated complaints. They don't come from a citizen's complaint, so those are considered division investigations, and they're handled the same way. They're handled by that officer supervisor. Internal affairs doesn't really have any involvement in those. So the investigative process, how that works, once a complaint comes in and we determine that there is some sort of reasonable suspicion and there is going to be an investigation, the first thing that's done is any evidence is gathered, whether or not that's us doing interviews and gathering evidence in professional standards, or that's the officer's supervisor or shift commander conducting that investigation at the division level. They do the same thing. They'll review body camera, they talk to witnesses, they talk to citizens, they'll review reports and those types of things. Pursuant to the statute, the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, before we get a statement from the subject officer, all that evidence that's been gathered has to be shown to the officer. So the officer, when they either come for their interview or when they write their letter, they get to see all of that evidence in order to write their letter or to give their statement. So we, as you see with the cases you review, when Internal Affairs has a case, we record our officers, we transcribe the interviews, everything's done via sworn interview. When the division conducts the investigation in the SRIs or the division investigations, the officer writes a written statement out and then they have to swear and affirm that the statement is true. So that's the main difference. Internal Affairs does interviews. In the divisions, they just have letters written. And that's basically because of the law, in that all the interviews have to be transcribed, all the interviews have to be recorded, and that's just a lot of record keeping for the divisions. So we simplify that by those minor violations, letters get written instead. And it comes out to the same evidence. And in the end, if officer doesn't cover something in a letter that the supervisor thinks need to be covered, they just tell the officer to go back and rewrite the letter or write an additional letter covering a different topic. So it kind of covers the same type of evidence is going to be gathered for the finder of fact. It's just because it's less serious misconduct, there's no need for the big formal interviews. And then the disposition process, as you read, this one, the formal investigations, we have a captain writing that letter to the chief of police. The division investigations, you normally have a sergeant or a lieutenant who writes the letter up through the major or sometimes the deputy chief of operations. It doesn't go right to the chief of police. But in all circumstances, that letter of the finding is reviewed by the entire chain of command. So again, it's not just one person making a decision and then that one person never gets questioned about it. The rest of the people in the chain of command get to look at the evidence too and make sure they concur with the findings of whoever writes that disposition letter. And then there's a discussion with the executive staff on all formal cases, whether or not it should be a sustained case, a not sustained case. The division cases that are sustained, that's also a discussion with the entire executive staff, and that's going to be who determines the discipline. And again, the progressive discipline is kind of just a basic outline of the disciplinary process. Of violations are normally treated as with discipline in a progressive nature, unless it's one of those serious misconduct allegations, when those tend to result in suspension, demotion, or dismissal immediately without any kind of progressive discipline. I've already gone over this before. These are some of the factors that discipline is based off of, and again, discipline is determined by the executive staff. And one of the things that has been mentioned about some of the time that it takes, so this is kind of an example flow chart of discipline. So those letters of counseling and the oral admonishments, even the letters of counseling, a lot of times there are not pre-disciplinary hearings. So, but when we have an officer who's facing a suspension, a demotion, or a dismissal, the statute allows them to have what's called a complaint review board, which means they get to select 2 officers. The chief gets to select 2 officers, and then those 4 board members get to select a 5th person. And that group of 5 is called a complaint review board. They get to review the entire case and basically make a determination of whether or not they agree or disagree with the findings, just like you do up here. They review the case file, and then they make the determination of whether or not they agree with the disposition of the captain or sergeant or lieutenant who wrote the disposition letter. So that is a process that normally takes a couple weeks. And again, that's when an officer is facing suspension, demotion, or dismissal. So after that, there was another process that's called a pre-disciplinary hearing, and that's, again, a due process issue that they get because of their contract rights and civil service rights under the city ordinance. That pre-disciplinary hearing is with the chief of police, where they get to sit there with their representative, make an argument as to why their discipline should be this instead of that. And that normally takes a week or 2 as well to schedule. So you're talking about suspension or greater, you're talking about once a determination's made as to what the level of discipline that officer is going to get, you're talking about at least a month in most cases until the actual discipline gets rendered because of these things that they're entitled to. And again, the law requires them to be able to select who they want. So if we go and deny them the right to select a certain person because they're on vacation or something like that, they could go back and say, well, you violated my rights. Now there's a due process issue, so because of that, I should get my job back. So we're more than willing to wait and make sure that there are no due process violations, because again, we would rather not, if we can't really control the Civil Service Board or an arbitrator disagreeing with the decision to terminate somebody or to impose discipline because they didn't feel that the facts were in order. That's their prerogative to do that. But for one of them to disagree with our actions because we violated somebody's due process, that's a real problem, because that could give somebody their job back, and it would be very, very easy for us just to avoid any kind of procedural due process issues. And that's why sometimes it can take a while for these cases to to move through, because we want to make sure the officer has all their due process rights, so they can never come back and make a legal challenge to a disciplinary action based upon due process alone. So that's the kind of a nutshell version of the discipline matrix, or the flow chart, I should say, and the investigative process and the complaint intake process, why certain things are complaints in the system, why certain things are formal cases, service-related inquiries, et cetera. And those are all outlined in the policy in pretty big detail, but if there's any specific questions about that, otherwise I can move on to the next topic.
That was very, very educational, somewhat self-explanatory, but very, very knowledgeable, and that type of information supports transparency and also allow the community to understand how that process works, so not only they can understand it, but also applaud it. So there's a lot of check and balances there, and whether it's determined if the person's right or wrong, having their rights not to be violated and things of that nature. That's what democracy is all about. So if there's any other statements or questions, we'll continue the presentation and move on to the next bullet point. If you will, Dr. Messmer.
Yes, sir. So I was not here last month, but I understand that the board moved to obtain some statistics from 2022 about the number of officers who resigned, who were facing termination during internal affairs cases. So I sent the board this document, I believe yesterday. So this has our completed cases from 2022 on there. So there were a total of 7 of these incidents where officers faced either termination or they resigned while under investigation. So there were 4 officers terminated and 3 officers resigned while under investigation. One of those officers was the case that we spoke about tonight. One of those officers was, I believe the officer was presented last month with a violation of the discriminatory conduct policy. And then the other case involving a resignation was the former police chief. So those are the cases that involve resignations instead of terminations. Some of these other individuals who were terminated, I don't know why some of them could have resigned if they wanted to. They didn't. 2 of them were reserve officers. So reserve officers are not subject to the same rights and responsibilities that when they have the same responsibilities as law enforcement officers, but they serve at the pleasure of the chief of police. They're not covered under the civil service rules. So reserve officers can be terminated at any point by the chief of police for any non-discriminatory reason. So that process about pre-disciplinary hearings and complaint review boards and things like that, they don't necessarily apply to reserve officers. So those 2 of these cases, again, involve reserve officers who were terminated after being arrested. So they were actually terminated from the reserve program before the administrative investigation was even concluded, because they're not entitled to a lot of those same rights that a full-time officer is entitled to. So that's a couple of the terminations right there. So those are the statistics for last year as far as the resignations versus terminations. And I went into a little of the issues previously about, sometimes why we would rather have an officer resign rather than be terminated. In the end, it does save the city the potential of that officer filing a grievance and getting their job back. It also saves a substantial amount of cost to litigate one of those grievances. But the main factor is that it enables us to ensure that officer is not going to get their job back. And when we enter the termination or the resignation into the state database for law enforcement officers, it does say resigned while, like in this specific case that we discussed tonight, the entry that was made is resigned while under investigation for moral character violation. So there's absolutely no question as to why that officer resigned. It's listed that way in the state system, and it's not like that person can go somewhere else and pretend that the incident didn't occur or minimize the incident, because they're going to get that if it's another law enforcement agency, another private employer, anybody can call the Tampa Police Department and get the records that you got tonight about that officer's case. So the facts of the case are never going to be able to be hidden from anyone. Definitely not going to be able to be hidden from the state of Florida, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, or the Standards and Training Commission. So that's the resignation versus termination. It really doesn't mean anything for the state. The state is still going to proceed with their certification actions, whether or not an officer is terminated or resigned. So again, that's sometimes why we like to accept the officer's resignation. If they want to give the resignation, if they want to resign while under investigation, it just kind of takes any kind of a question away of that officer potentially getting their job back, and then we have to go and deal with that in the future.
If you will, Carlos Valdez.
I appreciate the presentation. I don't agree with the fact that recommending for an officer to resign while pending an investigation, and more so, it takes about 180 days to conclude an investigation, if I'm mistaken, what we heard last month.
The statute has a maximum of 180 days.
Okay. So I think it creates a culture of saying, you know, it's okay to get in trouble. I can wait until the investigation is concluded within 180 days, and pending a job that I get, once I get my job that I know that I'm going to have income coming in, I'll go ahead and resign. I just personally think that just sets a culture and precedent in the department. Talk to me a little bit about the benefits. So if an officer resigning under investigation, is that officer still eligible for pension and any other benefits that comes with that?
If an officer, it would depend on a lot of things. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with, I don't know about the human resources aspect, I believe so. I believe if an officer is terminated or if they resign, if an employee in general, I think they're still entitled to, you know, the COBRA benefits for health insurance. I'm not an HR benefits expert, but I don't think that type of thing matters. The only thing that matters, and I mean, I can cover this in a later training session, but the only thing that matters for pensions is that you have to be convicted of a felony. And that's not Tampa Police Department, that is Florida law, that is every single public employee in Florida. You have to be convicted of a felony, of a crime that involves your public employment. So regardless of resignation, termination, has nothing to do with pension. They're entitled, if they're not vested in the pension, anybody, and again, it's by law, is entitled to get their contributions back. But as far as losing their pension, they must be convicted of a felony or admit to the conduct that would constitute felonious activity while engaged in their employment. So if you're off duty and you break into somebody's house and commit a burglary, you're not necessarily going to lose your pension for that, even though it's a felony. But if you're on duty and you're stealing, you know, felonious amounts of property, you're going to potentially lose your pension for that if you're convicted. So it has to be on-duty conduct, and it has to be felony, and it has to be a conviction under, unless there are very specific circumstances. But and also point out, we don't ever encourage anybody to resign. That's actually prohibited, to encourage someone to resign instead of get terminated. If the union does that, the union has the opportunity to do that, but we really, unless somebody's actually sitting at the table at that pre-disciplinary hearing and the chief is ready to sign the document that says you're being terminated, if they do that, if they go in, for example, if somebody comes into internal affairs and they give an interview and they see all the evidence against them and they're like, this is terrible, I'm gonna get fired, I'm just gonna go resign, we can't not accept the resignation. We can't say, well, no, you have to stay working here. Because again, we have to go through this entire process about complaint review boards, pre-disciplinary hearings and all that. So we can't just go up and fire somebody right then and there. You know, and we've had that before. We've had people come into internal affairs and they see the documents and they just close the documents and walk out and resign. So we can't prevent somebody from doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that shared a lot of clarity, kind of the behind-the-scene process, and also shared clarity on the misconception versus terminations versus resignation, especially in the year of 2022 with the 7 cases, with the 4 terminations. So even though some of the cases that we review, we may think we see a particular trend, but we're not reviewing every single case that there is. So thank you for the clarity. Thank you for the background information. I think it was helpful. I think it was educational and informative. Doesn't seem to be any other questions or statements at that time. So thank you, Captain Mesmer. We'll continue with
Yes,
our
sir.
agenda. Continuing with item 10, items to be continued. We're just gonna notate that the case matter for Kelsey Sturmiski, case number 21C-171, will be presented and is on the agenda for the October 24th, 2023 CRB public meeting. That's the only item that's continued. We'll continue with the agenda for announcements of next meeting. Next meeting will be held July 25th here at the Old City Hall, 315 East Kennedy Boulevard, 3rd floor, Tampa, Florida. July 25th is the 4th Tuesday of the month, as every meeting, Tampa, Florida, 33602. Is there anything else, Mike Schmidt, you want to add?
Sure. I want to let you know, I did send you the copy of the ordinance with regards to the CRB attorney, as well as I've sent you the 2 surveys that you've requested to you, so you should have those. But I wanted to, since the ordinance isn't very long, I want to go ahead and tell you what the ordinance said, so you're able to consider it between now and next month. So the ordinance states that the city attorney shall solicit applications for the position of the CRB legal advisor with applicants to meet the following minimum criteria: membership in good standing with the Florida Bar, minimum of 7 years experience as a licensed attorney, experience in the related practice areas such as criminal law, civil litigation, employment law, law enforcement, local government law. Preference will be given to attorneys with experience with the Florida Police Officer Bill of Rights, federal 1983 litigation, Florida Sunshine Law, and/or practice experience representing local boards. Upon the closing of the application period, the city attorney will provide to the CRB all applications that meet the minimum criteria. The CRB may establish procedures to select its legal advisor. The city attorney shall hire the CRB legal advisor based upon the recommendation of the CRB. The city council shall, by resolution, approve a contract for the services of the CRB legal advisor. So that's the gist of what the ordinance said. So what would happen is once the advertisements are closed and those who are qualified are received, we'll make sure we forward it to the board, and the board actually gets an opportunity to review the qualified applicants, and then y'all can decide what procedures you want to give a recommendation to the city attorney on who should be hired. The city attorney gets the opportunity to consider your recommendation and make a hiring decision. So that's what the ordinance requires, and that's what we're going to do. So we're going to send you the applications once the advertisement period is closed and we have our qualified applicants. But
Any questions in reference to that information and that information alone? I understand we do have a presentation of next month with more information, but on what he just shared with us, any questions there? I do have one question in reference to the applicants that we'll be able to select from. Would those particular applicants be under a standard rate, or would those rates vary? And if so, will we be able to see exactly what type of costs would be attached to our community patrons?
I stopped reading the last part because it's a city council issue probably more than for this board, but it does go on to explain that the city council shall by resolution approve a contract for services. The contract shall include the annual salary or hourly rate with an annual cap for the CRB legal advisor, and as well as a specific description of the scope of services to be provided to the CRB legal advisor, which shall include providing legal advice to the CRB and its members in drafting correspondence on its behalf. such other terms and conditions as required by law. So basically, the city council is going to have to figure out in its contract with this, or actually city procurement, is gonna have to figure out how to contract with an outside attorney to make sure that it is somehow capped either at hourly basis per month or at a annual salary. You know, that also involves the city finding the budget for this. So there's a lot still to be figured out in this requirement. But yes, the city's gonna have to figure out how to budget this, how to make sure this doesn't become an expense that, runaway expense, so they're gonna have to figure out how to either set a number of hours per month or, cap it at some sort of fee, but they'll figure that out. Luckily, I don't think you have to.
Okay, thank you, and again, please continue to keep us posted. If you will, Dr. Collins has a question as well.
In hearing the city's decision, is this a full-time person, a part-time person, or a consultant?
That's what we'll see with our applicants, but the answer is, it's not gonna be full-time. I can answer that for sure.
Okay.
So the answer then is part-time. The number of hours is going to be based on several factors, right? How much experience an attorney has might allow one attorney to spend a lot less time than another attorney. So, one attorney may be very familiar with areas of certain law and may be able to give feedback without a whole lot of research before the meeting, right? But another attorney may need to bill for hours of prep getting ready because they may not be as familiar with the subject area. So, those are the things why you want to look at an attorney's expertise and skill in the practice areas and decide what criteria this board wants in thinking of hiring. But
So this would be more of a part-time or consultant than what they're looking at?
My understanding is a contractor.
You're the board, so technically, I will still be, an attorney with Tampa Police Department as an assistant city attorney. Kamaria's role was the board attorney as an assistant city attorney. So it will be filling in Kamaria's role as your advisor to answer any questions of the board with regards to, really any sort of procedural questions that you may have that are raised during a board meeting that a board attorney typically raises. But then again, you might have a question, you might say, well, can you talk to us about, 1983 and lawsuits or something like that you would rather talk to that attorney about and the CRB attorney. So this attorney will fill the role of what Kamaria was doing in advising the board.
And there's one last question. When I listened to the job announcement, so to speak, I heard someone had familiarity with Florida Sunshine that I 7 years, but I didn't hear any. In this process of citizen review boards, been around for a little while, but they still new. And I didn't hear anything in there that says if anybody had any past experience or exposure to, because everybody across the country don't call them citizen review boards, but whatever we are and whatever it is called, it didn't have anything like that in that. So if we as a board gonna be looking at it, hopefully we will be able to see someone who has some background with that, but possibly not because we didn't ask what.
And just to clarify that, there was one condition at the very end that said, and board experience. So I think that would fall under the board experience criteria.
And board experience.
And board experience.
Okay. But, which kind of board? Okay.
Thank you, Mike Schmidt.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Before I adjourn this meeting, I'd like to give the opportunity to any of our board members to make any final statement or comment at this time. If you will, Carlos Valdez.
I do have a motion that I would like to make. It's unfortunate the situation that took place at the Fire Station 13. Unfortunate that we still deal with this issue on a day-to-day basis. So I would like to make a motion to have the findings of the department regarding the investigation to come forward so that we can provide recommendations as we see fit, to make sure that this doesn't happen, whether it's in the city of Tampa Police Department, the fire department, or any other department within anywhere. And I know it's a fire station issue and not a Tampa PD issue, but it is a matter of interest and it falls under that category. So I would like to make that motion.
I have no idea what you're talking about. I apologize, but I don't know what you're talking about.
I missed it.
So there is recent racist acts as it involves an employee of the fire station in Fire Station 13. And I don't have all the full details, so I'll just leave it at that. And if we can make a motion and have it passed, we can have findings that the Tampa Police Department will be investigating into that matter. I would like and appreciate that.
So in reference to that particular incident, is there an investigation?
Yeah, so we will have to
So
wait until
it
it's
is
closed.
under investigation?
Sure.
Okay.
By the police department?
Yes.
So your motion is
The motion is for
exactly
once the
to-
investigation is completed
Once it's
and
completed
closed,
and closed.
for any findings to come back to us as it relates to any matter that we can provide insight and recommendations to the city, the department, any entity that, even the community. I mean, it's a real complex issue that, like I said, unfortunately, it still takes place on a day-to-day basis matter.
I'm not killing your motion by discussing it, but I want to ask a question.
For Dr. Collins.
This case that we saw on TV, Mike, is and I did see that it's under investigation. Is TPD doing the investigation? Is the state attorney? Is the, who's doing that investigation? Because it did say it was under investigation. Because I would be willing, if
There's-
TPD is doing it, to second the motion, but I don't know who's doing the investigation.
There's certain things that I can't discuss right now about an active criminal investigation. But what I can say is that my unit, the Professional Standards Bureau, does not investigate the fire department. So administrative investigations of the fire department are done by Human Resources, not by TPD. TPD does conduct criminal investigations into anything in the city of Tampa that would potentially be criminal. So,
And this was, and I'm gonna ask you this question, if you can answer it, Captain Messer. This wasn't criminal, it was racial. So that wouldn't particularly come through TPD?
well, I think,
And I don't know if
I think
criminal
the
is
chief
racial.
mentioned in his, and again, I don't wanna make too many comments about something that is active. There is an active criminal investigation into this matter.
Okay.
And Chief Burkhaw discussed that, with the media, that there are detectives investigating it. But anything that's done in that criminal investigation isn't going to involve us. It's not gonna involve discipline. That's completely separate with the fire department. So, and then again, an active criminal investigation, who knows, what the findings of that are gonna be, or when those findings are gonna be available. When is that case potentially gonna go through the courts if it gets that far?
And
We're
if
not
it's
sure.
a year or 6 months, whatever it takes, whenever it's available, for it to be presented to the board. And we may not even be in this role, but there's other people coming after us, and I want to make sure that gets captured and recommendations are being able to.
Let me ask,
But to ensure that we're still within our parameters of duties and responsibilities, if this particular incident is investigated outside of our Tampa Police Department partnership, then those typically are the cases that we review. So will it still fall underneath our parameters? We really don't have a relationship with the fire department. I understand your interest in reference to being of community of importance, but in reference to reviewing the case itself and its findings and disposition, I'm not sure that falls underneath our parameters of duties and responsibilities. But if you will, can you share any light on that, Mike Smith?
Chair, I would concur with what you just said. I mean, there's not much more to add to that. I really think that's the crux of it. While we absolutely understand Mr. Valdez's concerns, I don't want this board to scope creep, you know, and start, you know, you're not gonna investigate every homicide that TPD investigates. You're not gonna investigate every, you know, robbery or every, you know, that's not what your job is, to investigate TPD's criminal investigations. Your jobs, as we've done excellent in the past, is to review what Captain Messmer described, the closed investigations where there's been discipline imposed. You've been given the authority to participate in hiring. I mean, if you look at the whole 18.8 Section B, the purpose and declaration, it all explains that your purpose and declaration is with regards to the Tampa Police Department, and to ensure that there is a relationship and trust between the department and the community with regards to reviewing the cases and issues that are interest of the department, and to increase and demonstrate police accountability and credibility with the public. And then it goes on to say that you review closed investigations. And so, I mean, I think it's always been that you're reviewing the closed department internal investigations and what they're doing, not what HR is doing over the fire department. And if you did that, then you're gonna, next month, look into wastewater? I mean, I don't know
This
how
is
far
outside of our purview.
Yeah,
Just pure and simple. Let's just pull the ripcord.
So,
This is outside of our purview.
So in that case, I'm not sure that we can recognize, that motion.
It's not
Understood.
Yeah, it's not a second.
But, again, obviously, the community is concerned. It's something that, we were all, look into and due process. We'll look for better results in the future. But thank you for bringing that to the community attention, and, we'll continue to see how that unfolds. Any other statements or comments or concerns? The Citizen Review Board is adjourned.